It's so cool. Mark, this wonderful gospel writer, he's writing in his community, his church and all, or maybe churches. Mark is writing this. And he talks about Yeshua, Jesus. He starts out right away, he's the Son of God, and he starts declaring how he knows that. If he's the Son of God, which I believe he is, no doubt. If he's the Son of God, things change. Like everything changes, the meaning of life and all. Because God sends his Son to help our whole problem. And we have problems in our world today, don't you know? We have problems with, well, name them all, anything. The big problem is sin. And that caused all this suffering and torments. By the way, the demoniacs, the healings that he's going to do, diseases, all that. We should hate sin. Look what it's done to the whole world. Even now, it's a mess. Our world is in a mess. I'm sorry, child, if you're listening to this. It's really a mess. Now, there's some beautiful things in the world, so I don't want you to get all definitely don't get depressed. We have hope in Jesus, really. And Jesus brought hope to those people, and he brings it today. He brings it to my life. I have a future. I have a hope. It's fantastic. It's bright. It's brilliant. Anyway, so Jesus is being shared by Mark, and he's declaring him to be the Son of God, and he's proven it by things like, one is how he teaches and what he taught. The teachings of Jesus are magnificent. 2, healing after healing after healing after healing after healing after healing after I can't even name it all. It's not even counted. We can't even count them all, what Jesus did. Then he delivers. Remember the Gerasenes or the Gadarenes, the 2 demoniacs who were literally delivered and their lives are changed forever. Deliver them from demonic spirits. And they weren't even asking for it. They weren't even asking for deliverance. The spirits in them were trying to get Jesus out of the way, out of the picture. Get out of here. We don't want you here. They didn't like him being there. And then it says the gospel of God's kingdom. I want to write here the gospel of God's kingdom. The good news, the glad tidings of God's rule and reign on earth. It has begun. It came in Jesus and it's still ruling today. It's ruling in my heart. Most people don't have the kingdom of God in their heart. They're not under his rule, his reign, his dominion. You have to submit. You have to volunteer to be that. Later, he's going to smash down and he's going to just make everyone come under his dominion. But this is Mark's book. This is what it's all about, basically. And he proves it over and over, chapter after chapter, verse after verse, healing after healing, deliverance after deliverance. The last couple, they didn't even ask for it. This next woman asked for it, and then Jesus was very unconscious. He didn't even touch her. He didn't even say anything to her, and she got it. We'll get into that a little bit later in the next video, and probably in the next video. And then we have the other person coming up here, this dead little girl. She literally died at 12, which she's a little daughter, but at the same time at 12 plus 1 day, they become counted as a woman in that time to the Jewish in the Jewish culture, in the Jewish tradition. So this little Jewish girl gets raised from the dead. She didn't ask for any healing either. Jesus comes in and takes dominance. The kingdom of God just rules over people that need it. They all need. There's need after need after need. The world needs it today. Can't you tell? The world is messed up. I'm really sorry. Now, if you're a child listening to this, which I hope you are. Well, if you're an adult, that's great too, teenager. You know that. Teens know it. The world is a mess. It's great stuff. It's a beautiful world in many different ways. Life is exciting and all, but it's a lot of poison everywhere. A lot of junk, a lot of sin. And that's the problem, sin. If you just look around and see the mess that we're in, like everything, accidents, diseases, natural disasters, natural causes of death itself, all that. I think you should start really hating with a passion sin, because that is a root problem. It caused all the others. It's just we as a human race blew it. In Psalm 115 it says, I think it's in verse 16 or something, the earth has been given to the children of men. We are managers of this world and we messed up. You say, well, I didn't. Yeah, but you're in the human race. Adam messed up. And it's just downhill from there. But the good news is it's now coming uphill because God's kingdom broke in 2,000 years ago. The rule of God started breaking in. And Jesus See, that's that good news of Jesus and his kingdom. And so he comes in and he starts delivering people, healing people. He delivered the demoniacs. Now this woman gets delivered because of her faith in him. And then the next one, the little girl's dead, and he raises her from the dead without being asked by her. Of course, her father, I was about to say her husband, her father asked. All right, this next story starts out like this. And we're not really going to get into the story exactly. I'm going to give you some background that makes it more interesting, I think. When Jesus had begun to cross over by boat. So they got back in the boat, and here they are. They're going along. And here's Jesus. I wonder if he's sleeping in this case. He's sleeping, like here, they're all up here. I'm not going to stand them all up, but they're all up there. Okay, here they are. Stand still. There we go. Anyway, they're all going, and they're traveling across to the other side. That's what it says right here. It says, Jesus began cross over by boat to the other side. By the way, in the last this is the 5th chapter right here. I would say 7, 8, 9 times, although if you counted Capernaum, like it could be up to 10, 15 times, it's talking about the sea again, crossing the sea, crossing the... Everybody's pretty familiar by this time with the Lake of Galilee. Jesus chose that lake, that wonderful Gennesaret, that Tiberias, Kinneret, different names, lake here. It's a beautiful, beautiful lake. And he's crossing over again. So I would suggest this is probably his direction. But who knows? The Bible doesn't say where he went exactly. He probably was down in this area. You know, maybe it's up here, but probably in this southeastern part. And so the boat's crossing over to the other side, probably coming up north. Maybe it went over here to Magdala or something here or whatever. But probably up here. He kept going to Capernaum. And so I have a question mark because I'm not sure. But anyway, let's say he went up there. And as soon as he arrives there, by the way, just crowds. They were waiting for him. They knew he was over there. And probably maybe someone said, he's coming, look, there he is. As they're coming, they recognize the disciples' boat. They've seen it over and over. Probably Peter and Andrew's, maybe James and John boat. So they're coming over here. And as soon as they arrive, a large crowd, like mass people. And who knows, maybe just curiosity, people hearing about him more. Some that they've already seen him, they want to see what's next. Like, wow, let's see what power comes out of him. You know, let's see what happens this time. And so everyone's coming around, they're gathering like crazy, word spread. So, and it says, while he was by the lake, now here's what we're going to talk about for a bit, synagogue leaders. Synagogue means gathering, assembly. Just like church means gathering, assembly, the word church. So now in that day, they actually had buildings built. I've been in Capernaum's synagogue. Well, not literally. I've been in the one literally that was probably 300 years built on top of the one that Jesus was in. They tend to build on top of each other like this. So I was over there. It's really cool to be there. It's good to watch and realize, wow, Jesus was walking right around this area surrounding. Really cool. And so now this guy named Jairus, really in the Greek, the J isn't it's not there. It's Iaros. I'll probably say Jairus, or I'm used to Jairus, but Iaros is what it's pronounced in the Greek. So this synagogue ruler. Now, who's this ruler? Well, this is what I'd like to share with you, and just kind of a fun thing to kind of go off a little bit. It's not the big thing in the story. It's not the important thing, but it's still pretty interesting. I love the Jewish nation. I love the Jewish people. I love the synagogue life that they have. I love all that. It's very cool. And in the Jewish church, we'll call it church. Really, it's synagogue. Let's call it synagogue. In the Jewish synagogue, they had officials, leaders. And I've done this, I picked this up years ago, but I've kind of gathered more and just keep adding on to my understanding and research. It's fun to know. What was it like in the first century? So we have officials in the synagogue, the leaders in the synagogue. I bring this up because of Iaros, Jairus. I bring it up because of him, because he was a ruler of the synagogue. So I kind of want to research, what's a ruler of the synagogue? What does he do? Who is he? He's an important person. Now, if he came from the synagogue of Capernaum, he's already probably he knows about Jesus. He's seen him over and over there. And maybe he was, who knows, we had 3 or 4 different things about Jairus. One is Maybe he was kind of quiet, watching, kind of observing, sitting back and seeing all the things. Remember, if that's a synagogue of Capernaum, and usually there's one synagogue per city, although recently there was an archaeological dig of, I think it's in Magdala, by the way. I think it's in that one. 2 synagogues were found. So sometimes there are 2. There are several in Jerusalem, by the way, even with the temple being there. But anyway, in Capernaum, if that's the city, he was one of the rulers. Now, usually there's only one ruler. I'll say that later again. But there's an indication like in Acts 15 or 16, it literally, I think it's 16, I don't know. Anyway, there's more than one ruler, obviously, in that verse. And there's another passage in the Gospels that say there's more than one ruler. But what was it about? I mean, who was this guy? Did he believe in Jesus yet? You know, he's watched him, he's seen him, he saw that demoniac, if it's at that synagogue in Capernaum. He saw that demoniac get delivered, remember, who cried out, "What are we to do with thee?" Kind of like the Gadarenes, you know. And so he saw that. He heard about the healings. Mass people were healing in Capernaum, you know, that evening. And over he's healing all these people. The paralytic that was lowered through the house, you know, I mean, over and over. But, you know, or he was already believing, but he didn't really want to talk about it because the leaders tended to be like, you know, unbelieving to Jesus and resistant to him, fighting, like they didn't really want to accept Jesus. I don't know. Or maybe he was a believer. But his daughter was at the point of death, which we'll go into probably in the next video, literally at the door, ready to walk through the door at death. It's like coming on a porch of a house and then you're walking through the door and you're dead. She was lying on the bed. Her illness really got worse. Her disease, her illness was literally ready to kill her. As a matter of fact, she died. Matthew, by the way, I'll probably mention this later, but Matthew says she's already dead. He's summarizing. It's not the detail. Like Luke and Mark give more details on this particular story. And it says, hey, you know, she's already dead. But he's summarizing the story. He's not going exact order. So now I put diapers. I like to remember like D stands I, A stands for P is people, and I'll explain that later. ERS. Now, I'm not crazy about using diapers for the officials. So I said, another way you could say it is D-Persia. Like Persia, like a country to Persia. Persia. Whichever you prefer. I put them in order of top down, downward like this. But to remember it, I like D stands for delegate, I stands for interpreter, etc. All right, elders. There's definitely more than one elder. To be able to start a synagogue, you have to have at least 10 men. And you have an elder over those. Maybe one of the 10, I'm not sure. But at least 10 to have a synagogue. You can't start a synagogue less than 10 men. And the men, usually, most of them have families. So that's like, who knows how many, 30 or 40 people right there in a synagogue. All right, here we go. We have elders, and I'm not going to talk about the elders until we get to those passages in the Bible. Then we have rulers, and then we have servants, what's called servants. Then we have a delegate, okay? Then you have an interpreter, and then almoners. And I'm not going to talk about any of these except for one. Which one do you think I'm going to talk about? Who was Iaros? Who was Jairus? Which one? Do you remember? If you said ruler, that's the one right there. This one we're going to go into, and what was a ruler's responsibility? What was his role? And why is he called ruler? You know, why is he a leader? So this is the one in this particular story that we're going to discuss. Iaros, Jairus. What did he do? What was his function as a ruler? So let's go into what it was like in the first century, in the first 100 years when Jesus was living, walking around Palestine, Israel. And so let's go into what was it like for him, this ruler, what he did. So I'll just say this first of all, he was kind of the ruler of the synagogue. He's kind of the top guy, one of the top guys. The elders were actually top, and then they were the ones, notice I put elders and then rulers and all. So they were the ones that kind of appointed the rulers. They were over the rulers. But anyway, the ruler had a particular job. He was basically the one who led the production of the service. The ruler of the synagogue led the production. Now, I put this in parentheses because I don't have these words down here, but prod, P-R-O-D. Those are the four main things that he did. It's the whole thing is that he was the leader of the service, the synagogue service, like a church service type thing. What did they do in a worship service? Like they went on Saturday morning and had synagogue, they had their gathering. So here's what basically they did. They supervised and they chose the people that did this. And these are the four big ones, although there's more to it. They chose the preacher for that day, who's going to preach, who's going to be the rabbi, who's going to teach. They chose a reader of the scripture, and they go through the Torah, the first 5 books in the Bible, all year long. They divided up into sections, okay? They had a Bible plan, but they chose the reader who's going to read it that day and on that Saturday morning. And they also chose to do the order of the service, which is basically the same as a lot of Christian churches today, by the way. Like you start with prayer or something, then you have worship time, and then you have a reading of the Bible, and then you have a preacher that gets up, and then you have an interpreter, someone who teaches more about it or interprets it. We'll get into that later. And then you also have gathering of money for the poor and things like that, like taking up offerings. And then you also have discussions. There might be discussions at a synagogue here. Okay, so preacher, reader, order, discussions. And they chose the people that's going to do that. They also supervised the service. Another thing that they did, some interesting info, is they're not a professional scribe or rabbi. Like they're not professional. They're not like school. They didn't go to Bible college for 4 years or whatever, get a degree. They weren't professional. I don't know, they got paid for it, probably volunteered. And they weren't necessarily a rabbi or a scribe or something. They were like what other people might call a lay member, a lay person. Okay. Now, they were usually only one per synagogue, although there are sometimes, maybe it's a larger synagogue and there's at least 2, sometimes 3. But most of the time, it's only one ruler, one guy who rules over the service. The elders appointed him. I already said that. Notice it's a him, it's not a female. They had general oversight. They kind of oversight. They oversight, like sight over. They supervised the service. They had the general oversight of what was going on Saturday mornings. And also they were in charge of the building maintenance. Like you have a building, you have to keep upkeep and keep up with cleaning and making sure everything is fixed, make sure everything is in order and all. They kind of did all that. They also made sure there was somewhat security, that the building was secure somehow, and things like that. So there you go. That's that, and I think that's it, because I don't want to make these too long. Otherwise, you might not even listen. Thank you for listening. Hope you got something out of it. The important thing is what I said before about Jesus. If you remember, I said, he taught, and he healed, and he delivered people, and it was God's rule here, and that's what Mark is really describing. And it goes into this fantastic story of this 12-year-old girl. And in the meantime, he put two stories together, which is kind of cool, very cool, because that's what happened. It happened like this. Jesus comes along, and Jairus comes to him, and he wants him to heal his daughter. So we'll get into that a little bit more, and especially coming up here, the woman with the issue of blood. She had issues. All right, God bless you. Thanks for listening.